Hello. Thank you for tuning into the video. If you enjoy listening to scary stories, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I upload on a daily basis, and any support would be greatly appreciated. And now, let's begin. I was 13 at the time, home alone for the night, while my parents were out at a dinner party or something. I can't remember exactly where they were, just that they told me they wouldn't be back until late. It wasn't a big deal. I had the house to myself, which meant I could do whatever I wanted. And what I wanted was to play video games way past my bedtime. I was in my bedroom, sitting close to the TV, completely immersed in my game. It was probably around midnight, maybe a little later. I had all the lights off except for the glow of the screen, and I was so focused that I almost didn't hear it. The front door opened. For a second I panicked, thinking my parents had come home early. Without even thinking, I hit the power button on the TV and the Nintendo, scrambling to make it look like I had been in bed the whole time. I rushed to my bed and dove under my blankets, trying to slow my breathing. I squeezed my eyes shut just as I heard footsteps in the hallway. Then, my bedroom door opened. I kept my breathing steady, pretending to be asleep. The door stayed open for about 10 seconds. There was whispering, quiet but distinct. More than one voice, but too low for me to understand what they were saying. Then, my door shut. I kept my eyes closed, my ears straining for any more sounds. Nothing. 5 minutes passed. Then, I heard the front door open and close again. That snapped me out of it. If my parents had come home earlier, why would they be leaving again? Maybe they forgot something in the car. That had to be it. I waited another minute before finally getting up the courage to check. I crept down the stairs and made my way to the front door. Everything was silent. I unlocked it and stepped outside onto the porch. The driveway was empty. I just stood there for a moment, my breath fogging in the cool night air, staring at the spot where my parents' car should have been. But there was nothing. No car. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. I checked every room in the house, turned on every light. There was no one there, nothing out of place. It didn't make sense. About half an hour later, my parents finally got home. I watched from the window as their headlights cut through the darkness and their car pulled into the driveway, the empty driveway I had seen just minutes before. When they walked inside, I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost ran to them. Instead, I tried to act normal. I asked them casually if they had come home earlier for any reason. They looked at me like I was crazy. They swore up and down they hadn't been home all night. I told them what had happened. They didn't believe me. They said I must have been dreaming or imagining things. But I wasn't. I know what I heard. I know what I saw. To this day, I have no explanation, no answers. Just the memory of standing in that empty driveway, knowing for certain that someone had been in the house with me. And whoever they were, they hadn't come alone. I was 19 the first time I really got high. Like, not just a hit or two where you feel kind of buzzed, but a full-blown, I might die high. It was one of those nights where everything lined up perfectly for a dumb decision. I didn't have work the next day. My buddy had just picked up some strong stuff, and we were hanging out with a group that made it feel safe. Or at least, it should have been safe. It was me, my best friend Josh, his cousin Alex, and a couple of guys they knew from college. We were at Alex's place, a rental house on the edge of town, right before the woods started. The house itself was old, the kind of place that always felt a little drafty, no matter the season. He had a big backyard with a busted-up fence, a shed that looked like it was about to collapse, and a fire pit made out of bricks he probably stole from a construction site. It was perfect for just hanging out and doing nothing. The plan was simple: smoke, chill, maybe order a pizza. I hadn't smoked much before, just a couple times where I barely felt anything, so I figured this wouldn't be any different. But Josh's cousin had gotten something way stronger than I was ready for. "Dude, just take it slow," Alex said, passing me a joint. I nodded, but I was 19 and stupid, so I took a bigger hit than I should have. And then, because I didn't feel anything immediately, I did it again and again. It didn't take long before I realized I had completely messed up. My body started feeling heavy, like gravity had doubled just for me. My arms were too long. My tongue felt weird in my mouth. And then the paranoia hit. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like my brain suddenly decided that everything was a threat. I kept glancing at the dark tree line behind Alex's yard, convinced that someone was standing there, just out of sight. Every sound was amplified. Every shadow seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. Josh was laughing at something, and I forced myself to focus on the conversation, but their voices sounded warped, like they were underwater. "You good, man?" Josh asked, nudging me. I nodded. "Yeah, just super high." They all laughed, but it wasn't funny to me. Then, right in the middle of Alex telling a story about some guy from his class who got expelled for stealing a professor's laptop, we heard it. A thump. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't normal either, like something had knocked against the side of the house. Everyone went quiet. I glanced around, trying to see if anyone else had heard it, or if I was just freaking out, but Josh's eyes were already locked on Alex. "What was that?" I asked, my throat dry. Alex waved a hand. "Probably an animal." Josh didn't look convinced. "Dude, that was loud." We all sat there for a second, listening. I was praying it wouldn't happen again, that maybe I'd just imagined it. But then, another thump. This time, it came from the back door. I swear, my heart stopped. Alex stood up, rubbing his face like he was already over it. "It's fine. Probably just the wind knocking something over." "The wind doesn't knock on doors," I muttered. He ignored me and walked inside, flipping on the porch light. The rest of us hesitated before following. My paranoia was screaming at me to stay put, but there was no way I was sitting out there alone. Alex peeked through the blinds. "See? Nothing." But then he froze. That's when I knew. "There's someone out there, isn't there?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away, just stared. Then, slowly, he let the blinds fall back into place. "Yeah," he said quietly, "there is." That was enough for me. I was way too high for this. My chest was tight, my hands were sweating, and every inch of my body was telling me to run. But run where? We were inside. Josh grabbed his phone, but Alex shook his head. Don't turn on the screen. They'll see it. Who is it? One of the other guys whispered. I don't know. Some guy just standing in the yard. Is he looking at the house? Alex nodded. I felt like I was going to throw up. For what felt like forever, we just stood there, frozen, nobody knowing what to do. And then the doorknob rattled. I actually yelped. I don't even care how lame that sounds. I was so freaked out I couldn't help it. Josh swore under his breath, and Alex moved fast, flipping the deadbolt, making sure it was locked. Then came the knocking. Not hard, not desperate, just steady, slow, like whoever was out there knew we were inside and didn't mind waiting. Call the cops, I whispered. Josh finally turned his phone on, shielding the screen so the light wouldn't show. He started dialing, but then a voice, deep, calm, right outside the door. I know you're in there. I actually stopped breathing. Josh was on the phone now, whispering to the dispatcher, but I couldn't focus on his words. I was staring at the door, waiting for something worse to happen. Then, just as suddenly as it started, silence. No knocking. No voice. We waited. 2 minutes. 5 minutes. 10. When the cops finally arrived, they found nothing. No footprints in the dirt. No sign that anyone had been there at all. The officer, a guy in his 40s with tired eyes, looked us over and must have realized at least half of us were high. I could tell he didn't believe us. Probably thought we'd freaked ourselves out. But I know what I heard. What we all heard. None of us slept that night. And I didn't smoke again for a long, long time. We were supposed to be out here for a weekend of nothing but beer, bonfires, and bullshit. That was the plan. Just me, my best friends, and a secluded Airbnb in the middle of the woods. The kind of place where cell service was spotty, and the nearest town was a 40-minute drive down winding roads. It sounded perfect. It was late September, that sweet spot when summer was fading, but the chill of fall hadn't fully set in yet. The Airbnb listing called it a rustic woodland escape, which meant no Wi-Fi, an old-school wood stove, and a long dirt driveway barely wide enough for my friend Jake's truck. But the cabin itself was cozy, with a big porch and a fire pit out back. The only other structure on the property was a weathered-looking shed, its roof sagging under the weight of years. The first night, we did what we came here to do. We drank, we talked shit, we roasted marshmallows. The night was perfect, until we heard the sound. It was faint at first, just a rustling from the direction of the shed. I figured it was just a raccoon or something rooting around. But then came the unmistakable sound of something knocking against wood. Thump. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't even particularly loud. But it was deliberate. Jess, who was sitting closest to the fire, looked over her shoulder toward the shed. What the hell was that? Probably an animal, I said, not fully convinced. Jake, always the first to jump to conclusions, smirked. Or a serial killer. Nope, not funny, Sam muttered, shaking his head. Not when we're out in the middle of nowhere. We listened for a little while longer, but the sound didn't come back. Eventually the fire died down, and we all headed inside. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The next night, we heard it again. This time it came while we were sitting on the porch, drinking and playing some dumb card game. The knock, thump, came just as I was about to lay down a card. Jess dropped her drink. That's not an animal. We all stared at the shed. The door was closed. The padlock on the front, rusted and old, still looked in place. But something was in there. All right, screw this. Jake grabbed one of the flashlights we'd brought. I'm checking it out. Sam reached for his arm. Dude, don't. Just leave it alone. Jake was already halfway across the yard, light bouncing in front of him as he stomped toward the shed. We all stood frozen, watching as he got closer. He jiggled the lock. Still shut. He kicked the door once. Hard. The sound echoed through the woods, sending a flock of birds screeching into the sky. But nothing else happened. See? Jake called back. Nothing. The next afternoon, we decided to check inside. Curiosity had been eating at us all morning, and by noon, it was unbearable. The lock on the shed was rusted, but with a little force, we managed to pry it open. The smell hit me first. A mix of mildew, damp wood, and something else. Something stale. Inside, we saw a blanket and pillow. A half-empty water bottle. Empty cans of beans stacked in the corner. Jess backed up. Oh my God. Someone had been living here. The realization sunk in like a stone in my stomach. Someone had been sleeping in this shed, right there on the property. Had they been inside when we were standing outside? Had they been watching us? Before I could say anything, a sound outside made my blood run cold. Footsteps, slow, heavy, getting closer. Jake was the first to bolt. Go! Go! We ran. We didn't look back. I don't know how we made it inside so fast, but the second we did, I slammed the door and locked it. Sam was already on his phone, fingers shaking as he dialed 911. Then we saw him. Through the small front window, a man stood in the clearing, right where we had been standing only minutes ago. He wasn't some confused traveler or a lost hiker. He looked insane. Filthy clothes, greasy hair, barefoot, and in his hands, a metal baseball bat, the end of it rusted. He just stood there, staring at the cabin, not moving, not speaking. Jess whimpered, gripping my arm. Sam whispered to the dispatcher. I could barely hear what he was saying over the sound of my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. The man looked at the cabin for another 10 seconds. Then, as if deciding we weren't worth his time, he turned and walked toward the woods. He disappeared into the trees. The cops showed up an hour later. By then, the man was gone. They searched the property, checked the shed, even sent a car up and down the road. But he was nowhere to be found. The Airbnb host, when we called him, claimed he had no idea that anyone had been living on his property. We packed our things that night and left first thing in the morning. They never found the man. And every so often I think about the shed, about the nights we sat by the fire, laughing, drinking, completely unaware, about the knocks, and about how close he must have been the whole time. I was on the couch, half paying attention to my laptop, trying to force out a paper I should have started a week ago. I was a junior at UW La Crosse, living in an off-campus apartment with 4 other guys. It wasn't anything special, just a basic first-floor unit in a complex mostly rented out by students. The kind of place where people partied too loud on weekends and maintenance took forever to fix anything. It was a cool night, so I had the window open to let in some air. There was a screen to keep the bugs out, and the street light outside threw a dim orange glow into the living room. Then I heard something, a light scraping sound. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind, but then I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. The screen was lifting. Someone outside was pulling it off. For a second, I just stared, trying to process what I was seeing. Then a hand gripped the windowsill, and before I could react, a guy started climbing through. I jumped up and swung before I even thought about it. My fist connected with his face, and he grunted, but kept coming. I hit him again, harder this time, and he stumbled. "Yo, get out here," I yelled, backing up just enough to keep my balance. Doors flew open down the hall. My roommates, John, Mike, Devin, and Tyler, piled into the living room. John saw what was happening first and didn't hesitate. He ran straight at the guy, tackling him over the windowsill and into the room. The guy hit the floor hard, but he started thrashing, trying to fight his way up. All 5 of us swarmed him. Devin grabbed an arm, Mike pinned a leg, and the rest of us held him down however we could. The guy was strong, but we had numbers. John pulled out his phone and called the cops while we kept him pinned. The guy didn't say anything, just breathed heavy and struggled. He smelled like booze. The sirens came fast, but right as we thought it was over, the guy made one last wild attempt to get loose. He twisted hard, knocked Devin off balance, and suddenly broke free. He shot up, bolted for the door, and nearly made it. But the cops were already in the parking lot. "Stop!" one of them yelled. The guy kept running. One officer sprinted after him, closing the gap fast. Right as the guy reached the sidewalk, the cop lunged, tackling him to the pavement. The other officer was on him in seconds, pinning his arms and locking the cuffs in place. We stood there, catching our breath as they hauled him to his feet. His face was scraped up from the pavement, and he was breathing heavy, but he wasn't saying a word. "You guys okay?" one of the cops asked. We nodded. "Know this guy?" "No idea who he is," I said. The cop glanced at the window, then back at us. "Well, you're lucky you caught him." "Yeah, lucky. That window stayed shut after that. Locked. Always." I've been a corrections officer at a state prison in West Virginia for 3 years now. It's not an easy job, but it pays the bills. Most nights, it's just a lot of routine, counting inmates, writing reports, dealing with the occasional outburst. But there's one night I'll never forget. I was on the overnight shift, walking my rounds in one of the older sections of the prison, cell block C. The inmates called it the tomb because it was always freezing and quieter than the others. A lot of the guys in there were either lifers or troublemakers from other blocks, so we kept them locked down pretty tight. It was around 2 a.m. when I started my count. Most of the inmates were asleep or pretending to be. A few mumbled something under their breath as I passed, but nothing unusual. I was halfway down the row when I got to cell 209. Empty. That wasn't right. The guy in that cell, Langley, was a repeat offender, assault, armed robbery, even attempted murder. No way he'd been transferred without me knowing. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight inside. The cot was made, blanket folded, like no one had ever been there. I checked my roster again. Langley was supposed to be there. No record of a transfer. I turned to head back to the guard station, but before I could take a step, I heard it. A whisper, low, raspy, right behind me. I spun around, but the walkway was empty. Just rows of locked cells and the dim, flickering lights overhead. Then, from inside 209, I heard a quiet tap, tap, tap against the bars. I raised my flashlight again. The cell was still empty. I stepped closer. The second my boot touched the concrete in front of the cell, the tapping stopped. Silence. I reached for the door handle. It was locked, same as the others, but when I pulled on it, it swung open. Unlocked. That wasn't possible. Every cell door in this block was electronically controlled. The only way it could be open was if someone in the control room had buzzed it, except I knew for a fact no one had. I stepped back, heart pounding. That's when the radio on my belt crackled. Unit 4, status check. I grabbed it fast, pressing the button. Yeah, I'm here. Did someone open cell 209? Silence. Then my radio crackled again. A voice came through. Not the dispatcher. Not any officer I recognized. Just one word. Run. I didn't wait. I slammed the cell door shut and booked it back to the station. My supervisor was there, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. I told him what happened, but when he pulled up the camera feed for Block C, my stomach dropped. Cell 209 was closed, locked, and according to the footage, I'd never opened it. But I knew what I saw. The next morning, I checked the records for Langley. He'd died in that cell 3 days earlier, and they'd never reassigned it.